34 degrees outside at 22 minutes before the 9 o'clock hour. Chris Lenois back with you on the Green Mountain Mornings program. And joining me now on the phone is the deputy editor of the Commons, Randy Holhut. Good morning to you, Randy.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Hi, Joyce.
Hi, Joyce. Thanks for tuning in. Better late than never, but certainly always good to talk to you on a Friday about things that are happening in and around the community, and people can read about them in the Commons, which is free on stands every Wednesday and online at commonsnews.org. You can go there, become a member, and support this independent, award-winning news and views source for Windham County. Story on the front page of this week's paper, Randy, about Vermont Yankee. A ruling, well, not a ruling here by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, more of just I actually want to say, this is basically a rubber stamp, right? The fact that they're saying, yeah, what VY is doing now is safe, nothing to see here, or should we actually be taking them at their word that VY has cleaned up its act?
Well, they're still doing the inspection, so they didn't find anything that raised any red flags. The Entergy's claiming that they've solved the problem with the water pouring into the old containment room, so they're not using the kiddie pools anymore to
thank goodness for that.
And so things seem to be moving along fine, but of course there's a certain amount of skepticism, like you say, because the default position of the NRC is saying, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it seems to be even in the face of some things that they know. Now, I guess the telling detail for me was Chris Campany wasn't quoted in this article, or somebody else from Windham Regional Commission or somebody else from the VY Citizens Advisory Panel didn't weigh in on this, and maybe that was an issue of time, but Mike usually would go and check with them on if they are satisfied with an outcome in a situation like this and a report like this.
Well, I imagine that would come with the next story, which was, I guess, on Digger today about the decommissioning fund and the state losing its case. Yeah,
Mike Fair, people can see this on VT Digger, and I'm sure it will be in next week's edition of the Commons. Nuclear Regulatory Commission mostly rejected, it says, a state complaint about decommissioning spending. Reminding the listeners out there, Randy, some of the complaints by the state about use of this decommissioning fund, please.
Well, the state was insisting right along that if you're going to use this money, use it strictly for restoring the site to a greenfield condition eventually, and they were objected to Entergy using the money for other uses that kind of were marginally related to the decommissioning, but they could have spent out of their own pocket rather than just dipping into the decommissioning fund.
Right, and I guess ultimately what they said, and reading from Mike's story where they talk about their oversight of Entergy's compliance with the structure is reasonable assurance that funds will be available to decommission Vermont Yankee in accordance with our regulations. Basically, it's a power play here. Federal over state is the way I'm interpreting that.
Yeah, the standard argument for any Vermont challenge to the laws, to the federal regulations on nuclear power.
Yeah.
Like, how dare you, Vermont, challenge federal authority on this subject? You are not allowed to. We know best. Well, and that attitude that's kind of meant Vermont pounding its head against the legal wall every time they challenge the NRC on issues like this.
And when we talk about the blueprint that is being set by Entergy VY and the whole back and forth, and we've said before, all these different communities are watching how this is going to happen, knowing it's coming for them. Those are important precedents for the NRC to set, I would imagine.
Yes, Vermont's ending up being very much the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, mixing our energy metaphors here.
Yeah, that's all right.
Of what happens when decommissioning takes place and all the various challenges that come up with the process. And at least the people in Vermont have been vigilant about this and have been asking the right questions at the right times.
Yeah.
And forcing the NRC to start thinking about this stuff.
Now, they did get a partial victory out of this ruling that was rendered yesterday by the NRC because they are ordering an environmental assessment associated with the use of the trust money for management of the spent nuclear fuel. I wonder if this is an opportunity for the state to have a say on who conducts the assessment, right? I mean, I think that would give people some peace of mind knowing that these environmental assessments are being done by a more objective third party than, say, somebody that the NRC and Entergy picks.
I think that would be critical to anything that's done on the site, to know that there is someone looking at it objectively, and not an energy company
Yeah.
doing an assessment saying everything's okay, and the NRC saying, sure, okay, cool, and not being that way.
Yeah. Boy, we all thought stories about Vermont Yankee would slow down once it closed, but that hasn't been the case. I think, I don't know if you look at streaks of stories, but including this week's paper and then anticipating this one being in next week's, there's no shortage of stories coming out of Vernon.
No, I mean, it's just the plant closing was the end of one chapter of this saga, but what's to come, and for years to come, the eventual dismantling of the plant and the storage questions and whatever other environmental things happen, and reuse of the site whenever that happens, it's going to be a story for a long time.
Yeah. I want to jump to the town and village page, a couple of stories, because it's going to be actually a couple of weeks before I get Wendy Levy back here on the program, and then she wrote a couple of stories that were pretty important follow-ups on things happening in the communities of Newfane and Putney. With regards to decisions made recently, or actually I think maybe a more accurate way of describing it is revelations about the town administration. First, over in Newfane, obviously after the primary election and the vote against the bond to build the new buildings, and this whole revelation that Gloria Cristelli, the town clerk, had circulated an email. They're continuing to talk about this and trying to find solutions around transparency. What's the latest going on there?
Well, the latest is saying that perhaps the town clerk, Gloria Cristelli, was improperly used town resources to do the mailing she did before the first vote on the town offices. And the town attorney said that there was a clear perception of conflict of interest with her advocacy for the issue, and I think that's kind of a no-brainer there, because she works in the building and she's been a loud advocate for replacing the town offices, because they are not really a good place to work with all the leaks and various other problems that are in the building. Right,
a conflict of interest, but nothing that in bylaws that necessarily are grounds for any kind of legal action.
Right.
Yeah. So we saw it happen in Jamaica, right, where they did the vote on Act 46, whether to withdraw or not, and they did the revote and they got a different outcome. Is there reason to believe they'll have a different outcome when they revote again on this issue in Newfane?
I really don't know, because this is, you're running into the same thing with a lot of town issues where you have a clear need versus the fear of being stuck having to pay for something you can't quite afford.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if they heard people say, oh, I would have voted for this if I'd known about it, or the way the question was worded. But certainly sometimes talk about using that metaphor of the state of Vermont banging its head against the wall. Sometimes I think it feels like this with some of these town initiatives against their voters. Up in Putney, another story, and this one's bottom of the fold on the town and village section, kind of a follow-up about some errors made by their treasurer with the IRS filings. What's the latest there?
Well, this is a case of not so much malfeasance as just mistakes being made by their town clerk. The last year was neglecting to file 3 years' worth of dog license fees with the state.
Right.
And this year it's failing to file the municipal tax forms with the state and the IRS. And it's being a town clerk is a very complicated job, and gets more complicated by the year.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not really careful and paying attention to what you're doing, things like this can come and bite you.
Yeah. Well, and the burdens put on the town clerk's office seem to increase, and the resources seem to decrease, right? We talk about how much money we're spending on our government and all these things, and then we expect the same sort of efficiency, the same sort of performance with less resources, whether that's personnel. I mean, I'm sure Ms. Coombs could have done a better job if she had an assistant or more resources. But then you have the town, even in a town like Putney, there's pushback on the budget and what they spend on things like that.
Well, the main thing is it's still an elected position.
Yeah.
And she's the person in charge of it.
Right. So hopefully they will be able to fix it and not incur too many penalties from the IRS, because that is certainly something that no town in the state of Vermont can probably afford. Last week, when you and I spoke, we talked a little bit about Hillary Francis taking over as Brattleboro's town clerk, but you hadn't had a chance to see Olga's article about Hillary yet. Now that you've read what Olga wrote and the profile of her, what do you think about her? Do you think she was the right choice?
I think she'll do. It's any person that's appointed to that job is going to suffer in comparison to Annette Cappy, who's by acclamation one of the best town clerks in the state of Vermont.
Mm-hmm. At least for the first 15 years of her tenure.
I mean, it's kind of, no one wants to be the guy who replaces the guy.
Yep. Yep.
Because everyone's going to say, well, Annette did it that way, or Annette wouldn't have done that, or if Annette was here, it would have been done a lot better, or I would miss Annette. And for Hillary, she's going to have to deal with all those really kind of unfair comparisons to Annette, who was stellar at her job. But Annette is leaving a good staff behind,
mm-hmm.
and that's not changing.
Right, and
I think there might be a few growing pains, but she'll do.
Well, she'll have an overlap of about a month with Annette as well after the election, and she seems to want the job, and I think that's probably, with a town clerk position, she's got the right qualifications for it, knows the community, having worked here, so yeah, I have good feelings as far as them making the right choice for the town with Hillary Francis. No relation to Rod. We need to clarify that.
But the key with any town clerk is a lot of customer service involved. If you don't like people, you shouldn't probably be a town clerk.
Yeah, that's a good point. So a lot of big shoes to fill, as you see, and certainly looking forward to our interactions with Hillary Francis in the future. And it'll be in future elections. This year in Windham County, Randy, we have quite a few contested races. You feature one of them on the front of this week's edition of the Commons, looking up at the Windham 4 candidates, the two incumbents, David Dean and Mike Mrowicki, as well as their two Republican challengers, Bonnie DePino and Eddie Cutler. Honest-to-goodness Republicans challenging honest-to-goodness Democrats. It's kind of refreshing in a way.
Well, refreshing, but with the caveat that the two Republican candidates are pretty much campaigning on one issue, even though they will protest up, down, and sideways, that they're not single-issue candidates. Well,
yeah, I mean, I interviewed both of them. Now, when they did the BCTV interview, they did it with Mike Hebert, but they both came into my studio, and they both spoke about a lot of other issues. In fact, we talked about all the other issues except for guns, so I'm not so sure if that's really the case. I think they really do have legitimate concerns, the way that the Republicans these days have legitimate concerns about big government overreach, affordability. Obviously, the Second Amendment is at the heart of what they're saying, but I think they do both sincerely have these other issues that we're hearing out there amongst other Republicans.
True, but like with all the races, especially in Vermont, the power of incumbency is considerable. If you win your first race for a seat for any position, House, Senate, or a statewide office, you have to really screw up bad to lose your job.
Yeah, and I don't see necessarily dissatisfaction with David Dean or Mike Mrowicki out there in terms of, and I don't have a whole lot of conversations with people up in Putney, Dummerston, and Westminster, but they're your reps, so certainly you have a choice to make in this election, and so you have to decide if you're satisfied, and you said, they're not necessarily out there doing what Norm Franklin did up in, Norm McAllister did up in Franklin County. So that's got to count for something, right?
Well, I've known them both for a very long time, and the constituents here know Mike and David very well. David for his advocacy for environmental issues, particularly water quality. Mike for his advocacy of human services issues.
Yeah,
and they both, in my opinion, have been effective legislators.
Yeah, and certainly when you think about the rural nature of some of those communities, you might think that there is an underrepresented or an unspoken vote that is a more conservative vote, but in your estimation, not enough to overcome that incumbency factor and the performance factor?
Well, I'm also factoring in the fact that if you're a Republican, this is the worst possible year to be running as one.
Right. Right.
This is good. We're a week and a half out from the election as if we sit here speaking, but this is going to be a wave election, in my opinion. I've been saying this for months now to anybody willing to listen, that this is going to be the equivalent of, say, 1932 presidential election that gave us Franklin Roosevelt, or 1980 with Ronald Reagan. Just one of those elections that kind of changes the electoral landscape and does it for a generation. I think we're going to see that with this election, and a lot of Democratic candidates are going to benefit from that.
Yeah, and could change the whole structure of the Republican Party. If you think about maybe not Donald Trump, but the Donald Trump type Republican having more of a voice in the Republican Party, and then what happens to these moderates. I mean, we're talking about Paul Ryan now as a moderate Republican, which I don't think even 4 years ago we would necessarily agree with. But certainly when you look at the landscape out there, he's actually somebody that seems a little bit more reasonable. And by reasonable, I mean more compromising on issues than we're seeing from the alt-right faction that Donald Trump has brought forth.
I wouldn't go that far.
No.
He's still...
Well,
he's still... I like Charlie Pierce's description of Paul Ryan, the zombie-eyed granny starver.
Yeah, well, so that's how they're spinning him right now. That's how conservatives are spinning Paul Ryan, saying he's actually somebody who can reach across the aisle and find agreement. And I was like, really? I don't remember that from 2012. Maybe he's changed in the couple of years he's been there.
No, he's not.
No, he isn't. Well, that prediction we'll have to wait and see on. I wanted to ask you one sports question here before I let you go, and that is Cubs or Indians? The toughest decision of them all.
Tito versus Theo.
Right. A lot of Red Sox in this.
I would probably side with Tito on this one because I think he's a great manager. The Red Sox should have never gotten rid of him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I see a lot of the 2004 Red Sox with the Indians team.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that at Pool League the other night. The game was on Wednesday night, and people were like, I want the Cubs to win because, I just feel bad for that franchise, how long it's been since they've won. I said, but when you look at Terry Francona in that dugout, don't you wish he was the manager of the Red Sox instead of John Farrell? And there was this kind of quiet nodding in assent from everybody in the place.
But this whole postseason has been like that, watching ex-Sox do things. Watching Andrew Miller mow down the Cubs in the first game, and you think Red Sox could have kept him.
Right, yeah, in the words of Bob Lobel, why can't we get guys like that, right?
And they've had guys like that. Watching Adrian Gonzalez suddenly find his hitting stroke in Los Angeles, or watching John Lester and John Lackey become pitchers again in Chicago.
Yeah, it's been a fun...
just all the other. It used to be the ex-Cub factor was mentioned in the postseason. That the team that had the most former Cubs in the team was doomed. But now it's the ex-Red Sox factor because there's so many of them scattered all about. And even though the Red Sox got to the playoffs this year, it was a disappointment. I think just because I think the big problem is the ownership that thinks it's smarter than it really is. Right.
Yeah, that's been the accusation for a long time, and that's why you see. Some of these people who seem to be quality people, Francona, Epstein, moving on and having success somewhere else. But it's been a first fun couple of games. Always fun talking with you on Fridays, Randy. Looking forward to next week. And until then, have a great week.
You too.
All right. Randy Holhut, Deputy Editor of the Commons. You can get the issues of that paper free on stands every Wednesday online at commonsnews.org, your reader-supported independent news and views source for Windham County. That does it for this edition of Green Mountain Mornings. Hope you all have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday morning at 6 a.m.